academic vice president of one of the most extraordinary academic institutions on the planet, the California Institute of Integral Studies. President Joseph SUBBIONDO was trained in linguistics and has spent his entire career in the field of higher education. And the academic vice president and dean of faculty, Judy WEXLER, was trained as a sociologist and has also spent her entire life in higher education and administration. So they don't have a psychology background, but they definitely have a background in higher education, and they have the daunting task of bringing a spiritual perspective to running the California Institute of Integral Studies. And I've been there for about 25 years now. I've seen it go through different administrations and presidents and vice presidents. And I can say that we are in a new golden age at CIS. And I think this is due in no small part to Joe and Judy's guidance of the institution. They are able to hold a spiritual perspective and deal with balancing a budget and making courses and making the trains run on time, which is quite amazing in New Age institutions. So, I will turn it over to, first of all, President Joseph SUBBIONDO.
Brian, thank you so much. And I'm so glad I came to Moscow to hear that. Thank you. I'm delighted to participate in this historic gathering of leading-edge theorists and practitioners of transpersonal psychology. As the president of the California Institute of Integral Studies, CIIS, the first accredited university in the United States to offer a degree program in transpersonal psychology, I wish to express my heartfelt gratitude, as well as that of many of my colleagues, and most of whom are here at this conference. We are grateful to you because the quality and depth of your scholarship, teaching, and practice advance transpersonal psychology in higher education. Today, I will sketch the role that CIS has played and continues to play in advancing transpersonal psychology in American higher education. My comments will be followed by those of Judy WEXLER, Academic Vice President and Dean of Faculty at CIS, who will discuss the challenges facing CIS and higher education today and how transpersonal psychology addresses these challenges. The CIIS story serves as a living case study, a work in progress, that allows you to see that a university can have academic credibility and institutional accreditation while challenging the prevailing dualistic educational model. Moreover, you will see that an institution can even thrive in this approach to higher education, as CIS faculty members and students are drawn to and remain at CIIS because of its unique model of integral education with a transpersonal ethos. I outline the story of CIS with the hope that it will inspire faculty and administrators from other colleges and universities in the U.S. and elsewhere to offer courses, if not academic programs, in transpersonal psychology. The story of CIS begins in 1951 with the founding of the American Academy of Asian Studies in San Francisco by Louis Gainsborough and the arrival of two of its most prominent professors, Alan Watts and Haridas Chaudhuri. Recognizing that education was critical in creating an enduring East-West relationship, Louis Gainsborough founded the first graduate school in the United States exclusively devoted to the study of Asia, the American Academy of Asian Studies. Gainsborough's launching the Academy was a courageous act because of the contentious anti-Asian sentiment in the U.S. In 1951, the United States was still in the wake of its war with Japan, and it was actively engaged in the Korean conflict. Nonetheless, Gainsborough persevered in his vision, and his academy not only led to the accreditation of CIS in 1968, but it also contributed much to shaping the San Francisco cultural milieu of the 1950s and 1960s. Over the years, the intersection of the Academy, CIIS, and the San Francisco Renaissance significantly influenced the integration of Eastern and Western wisdom traditions throughout the U.S. and the Western world, all of which nourished a progressive movement in transpersonal psychology. In 1951, Alan Watts, life dates 1915 and 1973, arrived at the Academy. By then, Watts had published 8 of his 22 books, as well as many essays on Eastern religious and spiritual traditions, particularly Zen Buddhism. He was established as one of the leading writers and teachers of Eastern mysticism. Through his scholarly reputation and personal connections, Watt positioned the Academy to be a principal meeting place for artists, writers, teachers, activists, and practitioners of the emerging countercultural movement, the San Francisco Renaissance. As Monica Furlong noted in her biography of Watts, the counterculture movement in San Francisco, with its new ways of thinking, contributed immensely not only to normalizing Eastern religions and spiritual practices in the U.S., but it also provided a catalyst for the national and often international 60s movements in civil rights, anti-war, environment, and transpersonal psychology. In his autobiography, In My Own Way, published in 1972, Watts, looking back at the 60s, extensively and convincingly documented that, quote, the American Academy of Asian Studies was one of the principal roots of what later came to be known in the early 60s as the San Francisco Renaissance. Watts' account of the spirited debate among the founders of the Academy sheds light on the evolution of transpersonal psychology during that period. Some founders of the Academy, Gainsborough among them, wanted the Academy to offer studies of Asian culture to prepare people to engage in business, while others, Watts and Chowdhury among them, were concerned with the practical transformation of human consciousness. Watts indicated that the latter group prevailed, and the Academy was cultivated, and in his words, the actual living out of the Hindu, Buddhist, and Taoist ways of life at the level of high mysticism, a concern repugnant to academics and contemptible to businessmen, threatening to Jews and Christians, and irrational to most scientists, wrote Watts. Watts played a critical role in developing the Academy's weekly colloquia and attracted many San Francisco's leading artists, writers, and psychotherapists, as well as visiting guests like D.T. Suzuki. In these dialogues, Watts pointed out that the participants of the colloquia mixed rather than mixed up the disciplines. Watts recalled with heartfelt appreciation his many dialogues with Chowdhury, who, with his, quote, gentle humor and learned mind, made him a wonderful partner in debate so that we could argue endlessly without losing tempers. The students who attended these colloquia included Michael Murphy and Richard Price, who established Esalen, the institute at Big Sur, as well as Gary Snyder, who became a noted poet, professor of literature, and the inspiration for the character Jaffe Ryder, the Buddhist beatnik hero in Jack Kerouac's Dharma Buns, the classic novel of the San Francisco Renaissance. In 1961, Watts published his book on the integration of Eastern and Western traditions and Western psychology in Psychotherapy East and West, By the end of the 60s, Watts would comment on the emerging themes of his day, themes that were swirling around the Academy and soon-to-be Institute. I have the impression that the psychiatric world has opened up to the possibilities that there are many more things in heaven and earth than were dreamed of in its philosophy. Watts continues, the field is giving way to movements and techniques increasingly free from the tacit metaphysics of 19th century mechanism. These included humanistic psychology, transpersonal psychology, Gestalt therapy, transactional psychology, encounter therapy, psychosynthesis, bioenergetics, and a dozen more interesting approaches with awkward names, he wrote. Watts' brilliance and charisma brought attention to the American Academy of Asian Studies. Moreover, Watts greatly influenced Chowdhury and their mutual colleagues in setting the agenda for the founding vision of CIS, especially in making transpersonal psychology a defining institutional project. Years after leaving the Academy, Watts acknowledged the success of Chowdhury in continuing the work they had begun at the Academy 20 years earlier. Watts wrote, quote, Haridas Chowdhury went off on his own and replaced the Academy, with the California Academy of Asian Studies, which is where something of the original tradition of the work is now alive and kicking quite interestingly. In 1949, Haridas Chowdhury earned his PhD in philosophy at the University of Calcutta, submitting a dissertation on the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo. Chowdhury was recognized as the leading scholar and commentator on the extensive transpersonal work of Sri Aurobindo, even by Aurobindo himself. And he was appointed to the Academy, the predecessor of CIS, to teach courses on the work of Aurobindo with the context of the panoramic landscape of Eastern philosophical and spiritual traditions. Thus, from its very beginning, the Academy developed an advanced education that would be highly receptive to transpersonal psychology. Chowdhury included many of the original educational themes of the Academy as he developed the California Institute of Asian Studies, later changed to Integral Studies. In 1968, the Institute was granted regional accreditation, which meant that the Institute students would be eligible for federally funded financial aid, and the Institute was a member of the national community of colleges and universities. Throughout his years preparing the Institute for accreditation, he never lost sight of the urgent need in higher education for integral education. He wrote, the educational system, as it operates today, does not take into account the whole person, nor does it take into account the whole world. Chowdhury maintained that Aurobindo provided a complete art of integral living because his work, quote, points the way to dynamic integration of the material and spiritual values of life. It is a call to the reconstruction of human life and society on the basis of abiding spiritual values. Chowdhury's definition of the art of integral living as the dynamic integration of the material and spiritual values of life is especially relevant to our assertion today that higher education needs to develop integral education in general and transpersonal psychology in particular. Chowdhury's assessment of the state of higher education is as pertinent today as it was a half century ago. It continues to influence integral educational programs, as evidenced by Ken Wilber's aspiration for his integral university that it cultivate body, mind, and spirit in self, culture, and nature. In his books, The Evolution of Integral Consciousness in 1977, Chowdhury clearly stated the need for higher education to include transpersonal psychology. It is important to have a comprehensive, holistic, integrated view of humanity. The integral view of humanity implies that no individual is a separate, self-existent entity. Just as the different elements of our nature, body, mind, spirit, are interrelated aspects. In the same way, every individual is a factor in a social continuum. Individuality, conceived as self-existent atom, is an abstraction of our mind. It does not exist. Nobody lives by himself. Human beings become more and more human through social interrelations and interreactions. End quote. Chowdhury's vision of education, like that of Watts, was based on connecting the cultural traditions of the East and the West. The integral world view, he wrote, and the integral thinking are in truth two sides of the same coin. The method of integral thinking represents a dynamic integration of the scientific and dialectical methods of the West and the self-analytical and psycho-integrative non-dual values of the East. Like Gainsborough, Chowdhury was convinced that global peace depended upon profound connection between the East and the West. Chowdhury recognized the need to include Indian core values in Western education. To implement his vision, Chowdhury and his colleagues developed the theory and practice of transpersonal psychology by integrating Aurobindo's psycho-spiritual perspective and integral method with the new and growing academic and professional field of counseling psychology. As already noted, integral counseling psychology had been central to the educational mission of CIS because it blends what Chowdhury considered the best in the East with the best in the West. Brendan Collins, a CIS professor and who studied with Chowdhury, recalls that Chowdhury often said that he thought that spirituality would return to the West not through philosophy or religion, but through psychology. Unfortunately, Chowdhury's formulation of a unique program in integral counseling psychology was cut short by his untimely death in 1975. The initiative was completed by Paul Herman, a professor of comparative psychology who began teaching at the Institute in 1970. In 1973, Paul Herman designed a graduate degree in transpersonal psychology that was based on his and Chowdhury's collaborative vision. He appropriately entitled the new program Integral Counseling Psychology. To ensure the long-term viability of the program, Herman insisted that it be clinically professional and state-credentialed in order to prepare students, quote, for employment in various counseling subspecialties such as developmental, vocational, rehabilitation, mental health, marriage and family, and transpersonal and yoga counseling. The degree programs are to be designed to fulfill the suggested education and training standards of professional counseling and psychological associations, both state and national, and to profit by the close collaboration of specialty groups in humanistic and transpersonal psychology, as well as those concerned with innovations in parapsychology and healing. The Integral Counseling Psychology Program, ICP, degree was launched in 1976, and in his announcement, Herman credited Chowdhury for the original concept of the program, stating that the degree was developed according to the integral view of the late Haridas Chowdhury, in including the major spiritual traditions of East and West, recent cultural and social science research, and the writings of leading humanistic and transpersonal psychologists. Writing 10 years later, Herman reiterated his founding vision for the program. In a paper published in 1983, Herman defined integral psychology as an emergent East-West study of the human psyche. It draws upon the findings of both Western depth psychology and ancient Eastern teachings and yogas to express a whole, unfragmented view of human nature, which does not remain merely theoretical, but also functions to resolve human conflicts and open the way toward activating high levels of potential. It includes the whole range, from proto-human awareness to expansive transcendent experience, end quote. In the same paper, Herman echoed Gainsborough's anticipation that education could be a principal catalyst for world peace. Integral psychology, he wrote, is a science of the psyche or soul, concerns itself with the whole potential of human consciousness. Thus, it looks forward to a full transformation of the manifest cosmos, including humankind in the evolutionary future. all human beings may assist in cosmic evolution as well as help resolve personal, social, national, and international conflicts by centering consciousness at the innermost core of the being until its guidance and energy are activated. By insisting at the outset that the programs would not only accept and graduate students who could demonstrate competence in both the classroom and the counseling center, Herman assured that the program would not only meet the standards of accreditation, but also that its graduates would find professional acceptance. After meticulously grounding the program in the requirements of established programs in counseling psychology, Herman integrated Eastern perspectives into the program. In the end, the program had more required courses than that of traditional counseling psychology programs. To this day, under the leadership of Professor Brand Cartwright, since 1993, who has recently stepped down as chair to be succeeded by Professor Barbara Morrill, the Integral Counseling Psychology program is one of the most sought-after courses of study at CIIS. I certainly hope that you agree that its history provides a relevant case study for accredited universities to consider in developing programs in transpersonal psychology. Now, CIIS, from its founding, has contributed substantially to the development of transpersonal psychology in higher education. As evidence, we need only mention several CIIS professors, many of whom are here, whose books have influenced the teaching, learning, and practice of transpersonal psychology. These include, in alphabetical order, Alan Coombs, Brand Cartwright, Jorge Freire, Frank Eckenhofer, Ian Grand, Stan Groff, Don Johnson, Sean Kelly, Robert McDermott, Ralph Metzner, Kaiser Pahaka, Brian Swim, Rick Tarnas. Transpersonal psychology provides us with a rare and comprehensive opportunity to transform our universities in particular and higher education in general. When a university offers a program in transpersonal psychology, it not only provides students with a program that has a professional degree that will give them a distinctive edge in attracting and serving clients, but it also provides all of its students with an open academic climate and a progressive worldview that would not be present at a university without a transpersonal program. In short, the presence of a transpersonal psychology program is a significant educational statement. It states that its university is moving forward into the emerging post-disciplinary and post-secular stage of evolution in higher education. Huston Smith, revered historian of religious and spiritual movements, commended CIIS for its role in advancing U.S. higher education. He wrote, "In the course of decades, American higher education has created tradition-bound ruts, and it works in those ruts. Consequently, it is vitally important that mainline universities be complemented by alternative programs that are not stuck in those ruts. CIS," he wrote, "is the best of these alternative programs that I know of." We are blessed to be living in an age in which unprecedented global and cultural shifts are enabling all of us to get beyond our many tradition-bound ruts in higher education, ruts that have been in place at least since the 17th century. While many faculty members and administrators have not changed in their educational visions, the students have, as is evidenced by the extensive longitudinal research on university students and their connection to spirituality conducted by UCLA's Higher Education Research Institute. The survey reveals that the fastest growing group of university students in the U.S. is the spiritual non-religious. Fortunately, CIS is not alone in meeting the needs of the changing student, as the success of our neighboring university, the Institute of Transpersonal Psychology, will attest. But higher education faces challenges not only in supporting curricular changes to include transpersonal psychology, but also supporting the pedagogical shifts and the lifestyle changes that reflect a transpersonal worldview. Jorge Freire, Brant Cartwright, and Alan Coombs have presented and written on the repertoire of teaching and learning styles needed to authenticate a shifting worldview. Unquestionably, these approaches are and will always remain experimental, and universities need to encourage faculty to get out of their traditional ruts and to seek to enrich the learning environment. Therefore, through integral education. Therefore, let us hope that universities will accept this pressing challenge in order to keep higher education relevant. Thank you. And now it is my pleasure to turn to my colleague, Judy Wexler, the Academic Vice President at CIS.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you. As Joe has laid out, in looking at CIS, we're providing a case study of a university that's based in an integral worldview and in which transpersonal psychology plays a significant role. CIS was created out of a critique of American society and American higher education, and it took its original form in connection with a particular point in time. Many universities were created at that point in time. Most of them no longer exist. And I think one of the things that's been so powerful about CIS is that the founding vision has been one that has been able to adapt to the times and to the needs of those times while still staying faithful to that vision. And I think that's really our challenge and our commitment. Now, over 40 years later, we're in another turbulent time in which we are considering if higher education and how higher education can prepare students for the future. As the 2007 report on college learning by the Association of American Colleges and Universities has put it, quote, "In this global century, every student, not just the fortunate few, will need wide-ranging and cross-disciplinary knowledge, higher-level skills, an active sense of personal and social responsibility, and a demonstrated ability to apply knowledge to complex problems." AAC&U looks to liberal education to provide this. I believe that the innovations that come out of integral and transpersonal approaches have the potential to move us even further toward the kind of transformation that is needed. Over the last few years at CIS, we've spent a lot of time discussing what we mean by integral education as we practice it in the 21st century. As part of this discussion, we've gone back to our roots to look again at the goals and philosophies of our founding, as well as the multiple realities of our present-day university. The schools, programs, and faculty that make up academic life at CIS are interconnected by common mission, history, values, and concerns, and are also quite different from each other. Our integral education project has focused on identifying common dimensions without creating a statement of orthodoxy. We've been careful to leave room for creativity and innovation. There's no CIS checklist against which every program is to be measured. But there are dimensions that each program expresses in their own ways. The dimensions are themselves the visible manifestations of the holistic education we strive to provide. They emanate from a mission that strives to embody spirit, intellect, and wisdom. Part of our understanding of integral is that it allows for dialogue between incommensurable truths and for the holding of paradox. In the face of pressures to tie everything together, it allows for the recognition that this is not always possible and it's not always desirable. In talking about education at CIS, I want to focus on a few key aspects. What it means to provide an accredited education that includes the spiritual, the dimensions of integral education we've identified, the impact transpersonal psychology has had on how we educate. Do I need to get closer? Okay. and the implications of the higher education context. Sorry, thank you, Brant. Sounded loud to me. And the implications of the higher education context in which we do this work. Underlying academic life at CIS is a worldview that holds that the spiritual is important. As an educational institution, we seek to embody the spiritual as part of the intellectual. As a university, we need to make sure that we provide our students with the knowledge and thinking skills central to advanced education. We cannot in good conscience do any less. In actuality, we want to do much more than that. We want to also support them in exploring their interior lives and in the intersections between that and their academic work. There is a creative tension here as we try to hold the paradoxes that arise out of competing paradigms. The two do not fit together seamlessly. But I believe it is in the tension between them that our most creative and important work arises. As an accredited university, we have to meet the expectations of the dominant paradigm. Those goals sit side by side with other more transformational aspirations. In combination, we have the potential of addressing the knowledge and characteristics needed in these complex and rapidly changing times. We've identified 5 dimensions of integral education. We seek to be multimodal, valuing different ways of knowing, integrating of personal growth and intellectual rigor, transdisciplinary and integrative, socially relevant and interface with the external world, and hold space for difference in the curriculum and classes. One could argue, and I would agree, that these dimensions are found in varying degrees in many higher education institutions. However, I think the worldviews that form the context for them at CIS differentiates them from similar practices in universities formed by other worldviews. Brent Courtwright, in his 1977 book, Psychotherapy in Spirit, asks what transpersonal psychology looks like in psychotherapy. He asks, is it shown by what the therapist does or how the therapist is? Are there some common principles, methods, guidelines which characterize a transpersonal approach? I think the same question can be asked about education that is transpersonal or integral. Is it shown by what the educator does or by what the educator is? And I think while it's easy to focus on techniques, I don't think it's the techniques that really make the difference. I think it is the worldview that is definitive, and so that underlines those techniques. It's what the educator is that is crucial. The incorporation of the spiritual into higher education is not without controversy. This kind of inner work has been regarded as personal and subjective, and so as unrelated to reasoning and logic that are more appropriately the domain, we are told, of education. As the American Psychological Association has asked us, how can one bring together spirituality and evidence-based scientific psychology? Aren't they at odds with one another, each seeking to construct knowledge in a different and mutually exclusive way? APA keeps on asking that question, but they're not actually the only one that asks such a question. Many believe that the incorporation of spirituality is a code for a religious litmus test or for a denial of science. On the other hand, learning is never solely an objective enterprise. What people learn and how they understand what they learn is always related to previous ideas and existing conceptual frameworks. As Joe has already noted, spirituality is clearly important to American college students and faculty. Over half of American college students place a high value on integrating spirituality into their lives, and more than 2/3 report having had spiritual experiences. Similarly, spirituality is also important to American college faculty. Over 40% indicate that they can be described as high in spirituality. Can we really ignore this as we try to educate students for the future In a world that is highly complex, rapidly changing, and increasingly globally interdependent, why would we even want to? A few years ago, when we did a higher education conference called Transforming the Heart of Higher Education, many of the faculty that came talked about how they had to keep this part of their work hidden from their colleagues and from the way in which they taught. And were really quite appreciative of and a little envious of the idea of being in a university in which you could bring all of that together. The impact of transpersonal psychology is most readily apparent, and I think, in two of the CIS dimensions of integral education: valuing different ways of knowing and integrating personal growth and intellectual rigor. But I think it also appears in some of the others. So, valuing different ways of knowing. A place of creative tension here is to offer students opportunities for the rational cognitive learning that is basic to higher education, while also pursuing approaches that open them to new and creative awareness. Higher education is by its very nature emphasizes cognitive learning and understanding expressed in words. While we increasingly recognize the prevalence of multiple forms of intelligence reflected in different learning styles, the college classroom tends to address learning from a verbal perspective, and students have to be able to present their ideas in written form. Contemporary reform dialogue is framed in terms of improving learning outcomes, providing students with opportunities to enhance their learning through application, analysis, and evaluation. Classroom practice at CIS, of course, includes lecture, discussion, small group work, and project-based experiences. In addition to all of those conventional approaches to learning, one will also find meditation, movement, drama, art, and poetry used as ways to bring students into the present and open them to different kinds of learning and different kinds of consciousness. Some of these approaches to knowing now fall into the category of evidence-based practice. There is effectiveness research that connects them to student learning. We know, for example, that meditation can increase learning and memory. We know that other approaches can help people access their preconceptions and work with them in ways that open them to new learning. These approaches can be used as techniques to achieve better learning outcomes, and also as ways to support deeper awareness and learning that incorporates the ineffable. Education at CIS seeks to help people to integrate the interior and exterior dimensions of life, and in doing so provides for stronger and more lasting learning and sense of personal responsibility. Integration of personal growth and intellectual rigor. As part of integral education, we see personal growth and intellectual rigor as being inextricably tied together, not just occurring on parallel tracks. I think when the education that we provide is that when we're at our very best, we are holding both of those equally. Academic work is seen as fostering personal growth, and personal growth is seen as fostering academic work. Self-reflective papers and contemplative, experiential, and participatory experiences all connect personal growth with growth in understanding, knowledge, and thinking. Learning is supported by helping students make explicit their beginning understandings and frameworks, and by helping them reflect on their own understanding and the connections they make. The theory of education is a holistic one that integrates the personal and the intellectual, seeking to go to deeper levels of understanding and transformation. As Bell Hooks has written, our work as teachers is not merely to share information, but to share in the intellectual and spiritual growth of our students. To teach in a manner that respects and cares for the souls of our students is essential if we are to provide the necessary conditions where learning can most deeply and intimately begin. Many students come to CIS as a step on a perceived journey toward increased self-discovery and awareness. These transpersonal goals are important in connecting faculty and students as co-creators. Our challenge as an educational institution is to keep personal growth and intellectual rigor in balance. In this, we're different from more traditional educational institutions in which the intellectual is abstracted from the personal. At CIS, our tension is that in seeking to make room for transpersonal and personal growth, we need also to be attentive to ensuring that our students are offered rigorous intellectual work and that they are encouraged to think critically. It is in the balance of the two that each strengthens and deepens the other. The techniques that access multiple ways of knowing typically also support personal growth and development. And in utilizing them in a context of rigorous academic learning, they also support the latter. Thus, much of what we do out of transpersonal understandings also act, we believe, to enhance learning and better prepare students for the contemporary world. Education at CIS seeks to be integrative across disciplines and educational experiences. Just as the problems and key questions of the contemporary world do not fall into neat disciplinary boxes, inquiry does not fall into neat boxes created by courses and semesters. We want our students to be able to pursue questions that transgress boundaries and seek new ways to bring ideas together. On the surface, this dimension seems more unrelated to transpersonal psychology. However, since the disciplines have not readily incorporated an acceptance of spirituality, any attempt to do so sends one immediately outside traditional disciplinary boundaries. It puts the focus more on the inquiry, I think, than on the discipline. Such a focus on inquiry and integration is one way to address the fragmentation of knowledge that has been created by the division into disciplines and subdisciplines. At the same time, it's vital that students go deeply enough into some area of study that they have the conceptual frameworks with which to organize their ideas. According to Haridas Chowdhury, integral education is an education which is based upon the concept of the total man, the total person, and education which is based on the total human situation, the global situation. The integral holistic tradition at CIS supports an approach that does not separate learning for preparation for action in the world. Increasingly, students come to us who want to make a difference and seek the tools to be able to do so. There has, I believe, been some tension between the commitments to social action in the world and the transpersonal psychology approach. The latter seems to have focused more on the individual person in relation to his/her spiritual practice, defined as something that one does in quiet and isolation. Spiritual practices that are done in community and that build community primarily seem to be ignored. Yet action in the world can be a manifestation of spiritual commitments and understanding. Action in community can both reflect and build spirituality. This is a connection that I think we have not yet fully explored. If spirituality directs us towards our connectedness, it should be able to help build community by breaking down our sense of fragmentation and alienation. Similarly, learning that takes place in an interactive and integrative classroom could reinforce and build community. For this to happen, we need to learn how to be mindful, to listen, and to dialogue, rather than to use discussion as an opportunity to plan what we are going to say next. Difference is something that we cannot ignore in the world today. Again, as Chowdhury wrote in 1977, mankind, humanity, can no longer be divided into exclusive segments so that the fortune of one will not affect the fortune of the other. We live in a world of shrinking dimensions with people of different cultural, religious, and relational backgrounds coming together. As it is commonly phrased, either we swim together or we sink together. If we are to be able to live together, we need to be able to better understand each other and to bridge our difference. Difference is also about different frameworks, ideas, experiences, and ways of understanding. We want to support paradox in different kinds of inquiry, as well as respect for cultural, social, and economic difference. This work requires inclusion of the personal. The combination of personal and intellectual work can facilitate understanding of difference and the development of skills to work responsibly in an increasingly diverse world. Without that, we run the risk of bringing together people physically and making them more aware of difference without supporting them in learning to feel comfortable with or to understand difference. However, engaging in this way is not without its challenges. What happens when ideas, backgrounds, and beliefs are in conflict? In an environment that seeks to affirm the individual, there has been some pressure to maintain an atmosphere that is not conflictual or angry, to smooth over difference in support of feelings of safety and harmony that can actually undercut building understanding. We struggle to see conflict as an opportunity for learning and to develop the skills to deal with and hold difference. All of American higher education is asking itself questions about how students learn and how to help them learn better. That concern has led to new attention to university teaching and to considerable attention on access, graduation, job preparation, accountability, and the measurement of learning. However, it is going to take more than reform and increased accountability to prepare our graduates for the demands of this century. It's going to require transformative practice that situates the individual in his or her education. The concerns have led to demands on universities to demonstrate that their students have learned and to demonstrate what they have learned. At a time when we need people who can think critically, creatively, and integratively, the pressure is to show what our graduates know rather than how effectively they can think or how imaginatively they can apply. The needs of this century go much further than that. When we start considering complex learning outcomes such as integration of learning, inquiry, critical and creative thinking, individual and social responsibility, innovative practices and thinking are needed. We know that it is not enough for people to be able to repeat information. They need to be able to formulate questions, find information, and organize and apply it in new ways. In educating for resilience and resourcefulness, we have to consider the holistic development of our students. Well, there are many lists of what people are going to need to be able to thrive in this century. A higher education is needed that provides students with the basis for future learning and action and helps them reflect on their own actions, responses, knowledge, relationships, and culture. These are exciting challenges, and they fit well with the heritage, commitment, and environment of CIS as an organization. Thank you.